Welcome to Betrayal Narrative X.
If someone had taken a picture of me at that moment, I'm sure it would have made a great cover shot for a marriage breakup textbook. You know those pictures where a man's face simultaneously reads pain, bewilderment, and a slight hint of a desire to kill someone? That's exactly how I felt at the time. But let's take it one step at a time. Teresa and I had been married for 6 years. I won't say it was a perfect marriage, but like the last naive idiot I really believed that things weren't that bad. Yes, the last couple years had been tense. Yes, she was often dissatisfied, and I always felt guilty, even though I didn't really understand why. But I worked, tried, provided, carried the household, and thought that, well, perhaps it should be so. Trouble in bed? Yeah, there were times when she wasn't really into it. Sometimes I thought she was doing it purely out of a sense of duty, but I put it down to fatigue, stress, something else. In short, I did what a lot of men do. I turned a blind eye to the obvious and hoped that someday things would go back to the way they were. And then, during another argument, she uttered this phrase. She didn't say it in a fit of rage, not in a state of affect, no. She was standing across from me, arms crossed over her chest, looking at me with that expression that women use when they want to humiliate as much as possible. It was a deliberate blow. A torn page from the book How to Stop Your Husband in One Evening. You know what the weirdest thing is? At that moment, I didn't scream. I didn't start trashing the apartment. I didn't throw the phone at the wall. I just stopped talking. I stared at her like I was seeing her for the first time, and I knew it was over. It's over. My whole life, my whole fight for this marriage, all the sleepless nights, all the conversations as I tried to figure out what was wrong with us. None of it made sense, because there it was, my answer. It was in front of me, in her calm gaze and dismissive grin. What? It was the only word I could squeeze out. Yeah, she shrugged. You asked me what I meant when I said I didn't feel wanted. Well, my ex knew how to treat me. We were silent for a while. I thought about all the possible reactions. Jealousy, tears, leaving with the door slamming. But I ended up laughing. Honestly. Not loudly, not hysterically, but internally. As if you'd just realized you'd wasted 6 years of your life on something that never made sense. Yeah, I finally said. How much do you miss him? She flinched. I guess she expected me to grovel, to yell, to demand an explanation. That's not the point, she muttered, frowning. What is it? I bowed my head. Are you trying to tell me that you've been living with a man who doesn't satisfy you for 6 years, and now you've decided to say so? She rolled her eyes. Oh my God, you're being dramatic again. Of course I did. Exactly me. The man who just heard that his wife still remembers how her ex knew what to do in bed. I nodded, shoved my hands in my pockets, and headed for the exit of the room. Where are you going? She was wary. Sleep. We're actually not done yet. I stopped in the doorway and glanced at her over my shoulder. I think we're done. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. There was no screaming, no broken plates or broken chairs. I simply walked out of the room, leaving Teresa standing in the living room, and headed for the bedroom. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely indifferent to what she would think. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Her words, spoken without a shadow of a doubt, without a shred of remorse, swirled around in my head. She hadn't even tried to soften the blow, hadn't pretended it was a casual remark, a slip of the tongue. She'd said it calmly and deliberately. I wondered why I felt neither rage nor sharp pain. Probably because, deep down, I had known the truth for a long time. It was just a moment of insight that confirmed my hunch. I lay there and remembered our past, our relationship, those moments when I tried to keep the family together. And suddenly it hit me. I was the one carrying this marriage on my back. I was always trying to smooth out conflicts, giving in, looking for compromises, reconciling us after quarrels. She could walk around for weeks with a disgruntled face, defiantly ignoring me, and I would start talking again and again, asking what was wrong, how we could solve the problems. Deep down, I believed that if I put enough effort into it, everything could be fixed. But here's the paradox. You can only fix what wants to be fixed. I turned on my side, glancing at the empty seat next to me. She hadn't come in an hour or two later. She was probably sitting in the living room, flipping through her phone, mentally justifying her words, maybe even convinced that it was my fault for bringing her to this. The next day, we acted like nothing had happened. Or rather, she did. When I sat down to breakfast in silence, she looked at me expectantly and obviously thought that I would start a conversation, try again to clarify the situation, try again to prove my worth. I saw that calculating look, that expectation of a scene, a scandal, a drama. Are you just going to pretend like nothing happened? What's supposed to happen? We had a fight yesterday. We weren't fighting. I corrected her. You were just stating your opinion. She wrinkled her nose, as if I'd said something unpleasant. Well, you realize I didn't mean to offend you, right? Yes. I nodded. That's why you said it with that look on your face. She froze. I thought she was confused for a second, but then she pulled herself together quickly. You're over-dramatizing everything, she stated, turning away and starting to wash a cup. I wonder how far she would go in testing my reaction. I wanted to see how long it would take her to realize that I wasn't going to fight for this marriage anymore. I used to make excuses in situations like this, try to find out what the problem was, try to make contact. But now I was just watching like a bystander. Over the following weeks, I could clearly see her behavior change. At first, she just pretended like nothing had happened, as if those words had never been spoken, as if nothing had happened. Then, realizing that I was really drifting away, she started to test me. She started to make more frequent conversations about our relationship, but she did it in a sneaky way rather than directly. You've been a little distant lately. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, I replied, keeping my eyes on my business. She tried to arouse my emotions. She argued with me on the spot, gave me demonstrative insults, made sarcastic remarks. I just listened, nodded, and went about my business. One day, when she again tried to provoke me into a conversation, I calmly looked at her and said, "If you miss your ex so much, you don't have to suffer. No one's keeping you here." Are you serious? Absolutely. She opened her mouth, about to say something, but changed her mind. She just turned and went into the bedroom, slamming the door loudly. Before, I would have gone after her. Now I just shrugged and continued drinking my coffee. A few days had passed since our last conversation, and something in Teresa's behavior had changed. She didn't try to get me emotional anymore, didn't make a scene, didn't argue over nothing. Outwardly, she seemed calm, even a little detached, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. It was the calm before the storm. A person who was used to controlling a situation would not give up without a fight. Teresa always knew how to manipulate. She knew which buttons to push, and since her previous methods hadn't worked, I had no doubt she'd try something new. And I soon realized what her plan was. She suddenly began to leave the house more often in the evenings. She did it deliberately lightly, carelessly, with a smile on her face, as if to let me know that she had a new, interesting life. "I'm meeting some friends tonight," she said one day, walking past me in her high-heeled shoes. "Don't wait up late." "Okay," I replied shortly, not even looking at her. I heard her stop in the doorway, probably expecting a different reaction. Maybe annoyance, maybe questions, or even mild jealousy. But I just went on about my business. Teresa stayed late more and more often. Sometimes she came home at midnight. Sometimes she stayed overnight at a friend's house. At least, that's what she said. I didn't ask where she was, didn't question her, didn't try to find out the details. I didn't care, but I could see that she was annoyed by my indifference. Once, when she came home late at night, she deliberately kept her shoes on, clacking her heels loudly on the floor, hoping to wake me up. Then, after doing a couple of laps around the apartment, she opened the closet, started making a deliberate noise in the bathroom. I rolled over onto my other side and went back to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, she looked overjoyed. "We had such a great time last night," she said, looking at me with a smile. "It was fun. We met old acquaintances and danced." "Great," I replied, not lifting my eyes from the phone. She was waiting. She waited for me to ask who exactly she'd met, who she'd danced with, who she'd seen. She even leaned forward slightly, waiting for my reaction. But I just kept reading the news. Teresa crossed her arms over her chest, losing all fervor. "You're not at all interested in what I'm doing, are you?" I looked at her calmly. "You're a grown woman, and I'm not your probation worker." She rolled her eyes, sighed irritably, and left for the bedroom. She clearly didn't like the game not being played by her rules. And then the thing I've been waiting for happened. One night, I accidentally woke up and saw her phone screen light up. She must have forgotten to mute it, and a short vibration filled the room. I shifted my gaze to the display, unfamiliar number, and message. "When will I see you?" That was cool. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't rummage through it for evidence. I just turned off the screen and closed my eyes. In the morning, I woke up before her as usual. I had a quiet breakfast, checked my mail, got dressed, and went to work. When I returned in the evening, Teresa was behaving as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. I saw that she was waiting. I saw that she wanted to say something provocative to see how I would react. So I decided to play her game. "How was your walk yesterday?" I asked calmly, sitting down at the table. She froze, then nodded quickly. "All right." Chuckles. "Are the girlfriends happy?" "Yes," she answered, and I noticed her shoulders tense. "Just girlfriends?" She thought for a moment, then grinned sharply. "Are you jealous?" "Should I?" She didn't know what to say, and that's when I finished her off for good, just asking if everything was the way you wanted it to be. "What are you talking about?" "About how you're trying so hard to show me how good you are without me." Her lips trembled. She was about to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "I hope you're really enjoying your freedom, because there's no going back." Teresa realized she'd lost, but she wasn't about to give up without a fight. She paused, waiting a couple days, giving me the illusion that the situation had settled down. But I knew her too well. It was just a pause before she attacked again. I noticed that she was taking more time for herself again. The long gatherings in front of the mirror, the updated closet, the styling of her hair, even for a trip to the store. None of it was for me. She was looking for a way to regain control of the situation, to make me jealous, to make me fight for her again. "Would you mind if I went with the girls to the recreation center this weekend?" she asked over breakfast, picking carelessly at her oatmeal with a spoon. I set aside my coffee cup and nodded. "Sure, go ahead." Teresa looked up at me, waiting for some sort of reaction. "Our old acquaintances will be there. Remember Christian and Nagalda?" "Fine," I replied, shrugging my shoulders. I saw her eye twitch, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Just thought I'd give you a heads up, so there's no surprises." "Thank you." I nodded and went back to my coffee. She'd been expecting irritation, sarcastic comment, hidden jealousy, but when none of that followed, she seemed to start getting nervous. Teresa did leave, and I enjoyed the silence. I didn't text her, didn't ask how she'd gotten there, didn't inquire about what she was doing. At some point, I realized I was getting funny. Before, I would have been thrashing around the apartment, torturing myself with thoughts of who she was with, what she was doing, where this was all going. But now I didn't give a damn. She returned 2 days later, radiant, with the look of someone who wants to say something but is waiting for the right moment. "How was your vacation?" I asked without taking my eyes off the laptop. "Oh, it was awesome. So many people, so much fun." I nodded, and she was silent, waiting for more questions. But I didn't give her that pleasure again. After a few days, I noticed that she started staying late at work more often. Girlfriends, trips, meetings, it all turned into some strange marathon of demonstrative freedom. Teresa was deliberately posting pictures on social networks, adding new friends, liking some men's posts. At one point I even wondered, did she really think it worked? And then phase 2 of her plan began, trying to ruin my life. She suddenly started pointing out that I had supposedly changed. She told friends about it, hinted to acquaintances that I had become cold, withdrawn, and in general, I think something was eating him up. A mutual friend called me one day and cautiously inquired, "Hey, are you sure you're okay? 'Cause Teresa says you've been acting kind of weird lately." I only grinned. "I'm fine. I just don't play the circus anymore. She seems to be trying to provoke you into something." "That's not news." I began to notice that Teresa had moved on to more active methods. One day, one of our mutual friends, Gloria, unexpectedly came to my workplace. We rarely talked to each other, but she came up to me with a sly look. "Hi, long time no see. How are you doing?" I was wary, but I didn't show it. "I'm fine. What's wrong?" She pretended she was just curious, but I already knew where the wind was blowing from. "No, it's just that Teresa said you were having some problems." I nodded, as if it was really worth noting. "Did she? What exactly did she say?" Gloria looked a little embarrassed, but then mumbled nonetheless. "Well, that you've become distant, not interested in her cold." So I got it right. She's testing to see if it'll make me emotional. Gloria raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You're reacting so calmly. Why should I care?" Gloria looked at me carefully, then laughed and shook her head. "She's hoping you'll break down and run after her. I'm not in this game anymore." That same evening, Teresa suddenly spoke of divorce. She did it deliberately casually, as if in passing. "Maybe we should make the breakup official," she said, picking at her salad with her fork. I looked at her with a slight chuckle. "If you want to, no problem." Teresa was speechless for a second, but quickly pulled herself together. "You're so calm about it? Why would I be nervous?" "Well, people usually have some kind of reaction when it comes to divorce. Is it that important to you that I react emotionally?" She was silent for a few seconds, then abruptly stood up and headed for the bedroom. Later that night, I heard her talking quietly on the phone. I thought he'd at least say something. She fell silent, then added quietly, "He's not the same anymore." Teresa couldn't accept that she was no longer in control of the situation. She didn't expect me to accept the divorce so easily, without tantrums, without trying to fix things, without the usual desire to smooth things over. It always seemed to her that I would hold on to this marriage to the end, that I couldn't just walk away. And now that I had actually stepped aside, she was starting to panic. I saw it in little things, in her gaze, full of hidden tension, in her gestures, which had become more nervous, in her habit of biting her lip when she was worried. She didn't want to show that she was losing it, but I knew her too well. Teresa was afraid I'd slipped completely out of her grasp, and now she was trying to find a new way to regain control. The day she realized that the old methods weren't working, she suddenly became affectionate, suddenly caring, tender, as if she were trying to resurrect the woman I'd once fallen in love with. "You look so tired," she said when I got home from work. "Maybe I could make your favorite dinner." I looked at her calmly, realizing this was a new game. "Thanks, but I've already eaten." Her smile trembled slightly, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Why don't we have some wine then? Just relax, have a chat." I sat down on the couch, not taking my eyes off her. "What exactly do you want to talk about?" Teresa sat down next to me, gently placing her hand on my shoulder. "Just about everything. It's been so long since we've had a real conversation." I grinned, taking my time removing her hand. "What do we have to talk about? We've already made up our minds. I don't want us to part as enemies." I nodded, leaning back on the back of the couch. "We're not enemies. We're just not together anymore." "You say that like you don't care. Isn't that what you wanted?" She began, but fell silent. I gave her time, watching dozens of thoughts racing through her head. She wanted to find the right words, wanted to turn the situation in her favor, but nothing came to mind. "You loved me," she finally said, her lips pressed together. I nodded. "Yeah." Chuckles. "And what? It just went away." Her voice was a mixture of resentment and bewilderment. "It died when you said your ex was better than me." Teresa stood up abruptly, wrapped her arms around her head, and began to pace the room nervously. "Jesus, you're still clinging to that phrase." I didn't answer. "It was just stupid," she exclaimed, stopping in front of me. "I said it in a rage, in an argument, don't you understand?" I slowly rose from the couch, finding myself face to face with her. "You said it knowingly. You knew what you were doing." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her get a word in. "And now that you realize I'm no longer the one who's going to tear your heart out for you, you start to panic." Teresa blinked confusedly, as if she hadn't expected me to be so direct. She began, but fell silent. You were afraid you'd lose me, but you wanted to see how far you could go. And now that you see that I'm really gone, you're trying to take it all back. Are you saying I set this whole thing up? I hummed, shaking my head. I mean, you don't know what you want. It's not fair, she finally muttered. You can't just throw away everything we had. And you did when you started testing me on how much I love you. She froze, and I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. She took a step forward, gingerly touching my arm. Let's try again. No hard feelings, no past, just a fresh start? I slowly took her hand away. It's getting late. Teresa turned pale, as if only now she realized that she had really lost everything. That night, for the first time, I heard her crying softly, but I didn't care. Teresa wasn't going to give up. I could feel it in every look she gave me, in every pause between words, in the way she was tensely silent, as if she were plotting her next move in her head. She didn't just want me back. She wanted to regain control of the situation, to feel like she had me in her hands again. But she didn't have time. She realized that the longer I stayed cold, the farther away I went. And when gentle entreaties didn't work, when allusions to a shared past didn't bring me back, when even tears didn't get a reaction from me, she decided the last thing she needed was to hit me where it hurt. I didn't immediately realize what she was up to. Outwardly, she looked as usual. She still took as long as ever to get ready in the morning, putting on makeup even for a trip to the supermarket, searching her closet for the most revealing outfits. But now her actions were clearly demonstrative. One evening she came up to me with a mysterious smile, her head tilted to the side. I was thinking, maybe we should take a little break. I looked at her with slight surprise, but said nothing. You do realize, she continued, twirling a curl around her finger, that we both need a little freedom, don't you? Teresa, you've been living as a free woman for months now. I mean official freedom. Why don't we try living apart? That way, you know. See how we feel about each other. I nodded, scrutinizing her face. And how long does this inspection last? Well, she pretended to think, though she had the answer ready. I think 3 months would be enough. And during that time, do you plan to try relationships with others? She frowned slightly, but quickly pulled herself together. And if I do? She asked, trying to sound confident. I hummed. Do you really think this is going to hurt me in any way? Teresa recoiled sharply, as if she hadn't expected such a response. Don't you feel anything for me at all? No. At that moment, I realized that her patience had finally broken. That same night, she decided to go to drastic measures. When I got home from work, she was already waiting for me, sitting on the couch in a short dress with a glass of wine in her hand. Guess who invited me to dinner tonight? She asked with a satisfied smile. I silently took off my jacket, waiting for the play to continue. Dylan, remember him? I sat down in the chair opposite, taking my time to answer. The Dylan who got drunk at our wedding and tried to dance on the table? She rolled her eyes, waving her hand away. Well, it changed a long time ago. Now he's successful, interesting, courting me. She paused, hoping I would at least tense up. I only nodded. Oh, that's great. You won't even ask me if I'm going with him? I don't care, I replied, shrugging my shoulders. She frowned, clearly not understanding why it wasn't working. Well, you do realize I like him, right? For God's sake, Teresa. I took the remote control and turned on the TV. She jumped up from the couch, setting her glass on the table irritably. Are you normal? Any other man would have exploded with jealousy by now. I'm not any of the others. What if I do sleep with him? I grinned, tilting my head slightly. So what's the problem? Go ahead, try it. Her eyes widened, the fingers on her hands clenched. Are you serious? Teresa, do you want to know what I'm thinking right now? She nodded frantically. I think you're bluffing. Her lips quivered, but she immediately pulled herself together. And if I don't? I grinned. Then you'll just prove conclusively that I was right to stop fighting for this marriage. She didn't know what to answer. Later that night, I heard her typing something into her phone and then calling someone. Hey, Dylan. I was thinking, maybe I'll see you after all. I wasn't going to stop her. If Teresa decided to sleep with Dylan to prove to herself that she could still control the situation, That was her own problem. After all, adults were responsible for their decisions, and if she wanted to test my boundaries, she would soon see that I was already out of this game. The next day, she left deliberately early, pretending to be going about her business. Her clothes were carefully chosen. The short dress she usually wore when she wanted to impress, heels she hadn't worn in a while, light but clearly visible makeup, and beautiful fishnet lingerie. She didn't make eye contact with me as she walked away, but I noticed her waiting for a reaction. "You'll be back late?" She froze for a moment, then smiled strangely. "As it goes," she replied, pretending not to care. The door slammed shut, and I quietly went back to my business. I didn't follow her social media. I didn't call her friends. I didn't check on her whereabouts. I went to the gym, had a quiet dinner, watched a movie, and for the first time in a long time I felt really light. Teresa came back late at midnight, opened the door quietly, trying not to make any noise. I guess she hoped I was asleep, because if I didn't see her, she wouldn't have to explain where she'd been and what she'd been doing. I sat in the chair looking at my phone and waited for the moment she walked into the apartment. She flinched when she saw me in the semi-darkness. "Are you still awake?" I decided to wait. Teresa set the bag carefully on the nightstand, as if she didn't know how to act. "So, what, you can interrogate me?" "No," I said, rising from my chair. "I just want you to answer one question for me." She swallowed, but pretended not to care. "Which one?" I moved closer, but not too close, just to see every emotion on her face. "Are you happy with your choice?" Teresa froze, not knowing what to say. "What are you talking about?" "About what you were trying to accomplish. Does that make you feel better?" I don't know what you mean." I nodded, as if I'd heard exactly the answer I'd expected. "Got it. So no." She looked away, biting her lip, clearly angry with herself for not being able to take my calm gaze. "It was my decision," she finally said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Of course it's yours," I agreed. "So was it worth it?" "You know what the funny thing is?" I continued, grinning. "You didn't even want this." Teresa jerked her head up sharply, looking at me defiantly. "What makes you say that?" "Because you don't know how to be alone." She turned pale, but quickly managed herself. "Bullshit. Really?" I tilted my head, studying her face. "Then why did you do all this? Why did you try to show me how great you were without me, if you really were?" She bit her lip, clenched her fists, but continued to stand with her head held proudly high. You're just an insensitive bastard." "Yes, of course. That's why you worked so hard to get my attention back." Teresa was breathing hard, her fingers trembling, but she still didn't want to admit she'd lost. "You know what? I don't care at all." "Then why are you yelling?" She froze, her shoulders slumping slightly, as if all the air had gone out of her chest. I slowly turned around and went to the bedroom door. "Where did you sleep?" I asked suddenly, pausing for a second. "It's none of your business," she finally muttered. I nodded as if I agreed with that, and slammed the door behind me. That night was the first time I slept so peacefully, as if I had finally shed a heavy weight. Teresa didn't try to wake me up, didn't slam the doors, didn't play the music at full volume like she used to do when she wanted to piss me off. She just sat in the living room, immersed in the silence, as if she'd realized something too important, but it was too late. Teresa didn't leave in the morning, though she usually tried to disappear from the house as soon as possible after a fight. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, twirling the spoon nervously in her hands and pretending to be completely absorbed in her thoughts. I watched her, taking my time to make conversation, letting her be the first to start what she stayed for. She hesitated, but at some point she did sigh, and without looking at me, she muttered, "We need to talk." I continued to eat my breakfast quietly, without even lifting my head. "About what?" "About us," she said as if it was a matter of course. "Do we still have in us?" Teresa froze, then abruptly placed the spoon on the table. I want to apologize," she breathed out, interlocking her fingers. I raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't say a word, waiting for him to continue. "I was wrong," she continued, her lips pressed together. "I said a lot of things I shouldn't have said, did things I shouldn't have done." I nodded quietly, not expressing any emotion. Teresa looked up at me with a glint of irritation mixed with confusion. And what? I'm trying to explain that I was wrong. Wrong about what exactly? I asked, setting the cup aside. She averted her gaze again, crossed her arms over her chest as if defending herself against my calm. For checking up on you, she mumbled, squeezing her shoulders. For trying to hurt you. You didn't try, you did. I am confused. You weren't confused, Teresa. You knew exactly what you were doing. She opened her mouth, but I gestured for her to stop. You didn't say random words. You didn't do anything on emotion. You were testing boundaries, tried to see how far you could go. Teresa blushed, but didn't argue. She paused, shook her head, and finally admitted, I didn't think you'd let go so easily. I nodded, having known for some time now that I did. Did you expect me to fight for you to the last man? She nodded, unable to deny the obvious. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. But I didn't. No. What do you want now? She froze, the fingers on her hands twitching, as if she were restraining herself from saying something unnecessary. Her voice shook, but she managed it right away. I want to try to start over. I looked at her carefully, holding her gaze longer than I should have. What exactly do you want to start over? Teresa bit her lip, frowned, then looked at me defiantly. All of them. You want to rebuild a relationship on what? On mistrust, manipulation, testing? No, she answered quickly. On what then? She was silent again, as if trying to find the right words. On understanding. A mutual understanding between people where one is constantly checking up on the other? She lowered her eyes, unable to find anything to object. Teresa. I leaned a little closer, waiting for her to look at me. You don't want to come back because you love me, but because you're afraid to be alone. She froze, her fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. It's not true, she whispered, but there was no confidence in her voice. Then answer me honestly. If I said, let's give it a try right now, would you immediately feel like you were back in control? Teresa didn't answer anything. Because you don't want me, I continued, studying her face calmly. You want the feeling of power you've lost back. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, then looked at me again. So what? Now you're just going to cut me out of your life. You made your own choices. Teresa held her breath, then nodded slowly. I got up from the table, put the dishes in the sink, and headed for the door. Where are you going? She asked, almost pleadingly. I threw on my jacket without turning around. I'm filing for divorce. I heard her exhale noisily, but I didn't look back. When I closed the door behind me, I felt as light as I hadn't felt in years. Teresa is left sitting at the table, alone in the empty apartment, realizing that she has just lost everything. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.